Hi guys, welcome to my channel. My name's Teresa. This video is late. I realized that I have not filmed my May or April wrap-ups. Not cool. This video is not going to be my entire May wrap-up though, as you will see in the title. This is specifically my Christian fiction read-along, wrap-up. So hopefully it won't be very long because I didn't read very many books for it, but I completed the whole thing. So this is a readathon that was started by Paperbacks and Ponytails. I will link her information down below, of course. Everything is always going to be linked down below. If you have any questions, just check out the description box. So this is the first year she's doing this. She basically just wanted to do a readathon where we're reading Christian fiction, and I was really stoked about that because I've been really wanting to read more Christian fiction, get more of that into my reading. This whole shelf here is all Christian fiction I have not read, and I have some more books down here that are also unread Christian fiction books. So I was really excited for that, though I only read one book off my physical TBR. But hey, it worked. At least I got one in. Basically, like I said, she wanted to read Christian fiction. You didn't have to, but that was like kind of the point of the readathon. I do believe, yeah, I did do a TBR for this, so I will link it up above. I don't know what side. I'll link it. I believe it's just in my regular May TBR. It was also with my Desertathon TBR, which failed miserably, so there's that. But I did the Christian fiction readathon. So this basically just had a few prompts. There was a group book. I did not end up reading that, but I did complete all of the prompts. So let's get into it. Very first prompt was to read a book with flowers on the cover. And for this, I chose The View from Rain Shadow Bay. This is book one. I think it's like in Lavender something series, and this is by Colleen Coble. So this is a mystery romantic suspense. There we go. It's a romantic suspense novel. I normally don't read romantic suspense. I don't mind romance in my books. I just don't like romantic books. Just not my thing. I really prefer the more suspenseful side versus the romantic side, and I find in a lot of romantic suspense, at least the ones I personally have read, they're very predictable and very much just kind of cliche. Maybe that's just, again, what I've read. Maybe that's the point. I don't know. I mean, if you like that, that's cool. It's just personally, I prefer more suspense than romance, and obviously because it's a romantic suspense, romance is a huge factor. I did like the romance in this book, but again, to me, it felt very cliche, very obvious, very much like, well, you know from the beginning they're going to get together, which I mean, I think is kind of the point. Like, they're not trying to hide that or whatever, but that to me was just not something that I am that interested in, to be honest. So I only gave this book a 3 stars. I did enjoy it. I did enjoy the faith element. I can say this was not like a slap you in the face with the Bible type of book. The faith element was obviously strong in it. Like, the characters are believers, and so they talk about God and their faith in God, but it's not preachy. In my opinion, it's not a preachy book. So I think, you know, someone who is not a Christian who likes romantic suspense could enjoy this. This book is about, oh, and by the way, it does have lavender on the cover, as you can see. So there's the flowers. So this book was about a woman who's, you know what? I recently read another book by Colleen Coble. So give me 1 second to revamp my memory, make sure I'm telling you about the right one. Also, the series, I just looked it up. It is called Lavender Tides. So it's book 1 in Lavender Tides. So I'm just going to read really quickly the synopsis here. After her husband Jack dies in a climbing incident, Shauna has only her 5-year-old son and her helicopter charter business to live for. Every day is a struggle to make ends meet, and she lives in a constant fear of losing even more than she already has. When her business partner is murdered, his final words convince Shauna that she's in danger too. But where can she turn? Zach Bannister was her husband's best friend and is the person she blames for his death. She's barely spoken to him since, but right now he seems her only hope of protecting her son. Zach is only too happy to assuage his guilt over Jack's death by helping Shauna any way he can, but there are secrets involved dating back to Shauna's childhood that more than one person would prefer to stay hidden. In The View from Rain Shadow Bay, suspense, danger, and longing to love again ignite amid the gorgeous lavender fields of Washington State. I did like that it was set in Washington, as I am from Oregon. If you can tell by my sweater, I am from Oregon, and so it felt kind of fun to be reading a book that was set in the Pacific Northwest. That's like my favorite trope ever, is Pacific Northwest books. So yeah, as it says, you know, obviously there's a romance between her and her husband's old best friend. I did like it. I did like the fact that it wasn't like an instant thing. Like, she had a lot of conflict, not only because she blames him for her husband's death, which you will find out why in there, but also because, you know, one, she's a widow, so she feels like, if I love again, will I betray my husband, even though he's been gone for a few years, you know? And two, like, he was his best friend and all of this stuff. I don't know. I did enjoy it. There were a few parts that did seem a little odd to me, like the best friend thing. Obviously, it was like, it was clean. There was no affair or anything like that. Like, it was after. But it did just seem a little bit strange how he's like, yeah, I've always liked you, but you were his, and I wasn't going to take you from him, obviously, but I've always liked you. And I'm like, I don't know. That just kind of felt a bit weird to me. But again, I'm not a romance reader, so maybe that's not weird. I don't really know how to say. But again, like I said, I enjoyed it. 3 stars. The suspense, the mystery, that part was really good. I did really enjoy trying to figure out what the heck was going on. It was really, you have kind of like multiple points of view. You do kind of go through the point of view of the person who is the murderer, basically, which was interesting, trying to find out who they are, what their motivation is, and yeah, kind of why the things that are happening around town are happening. It was pretty interesting. It also deals a little bit with PTSD. So I did like that aspect of it. And yeah, I don't really know what else to say about it besides that. It was a okay book. I've read 2 Colleen Cobles now. Both of them were 3 stars. I don't know if she's an author for me. Again, romantic suspense is just not my genre. That seems to be what she writes. So we'll see. I'm willing to give her another chance. Not a bad book, like I said, just not for me. Okie dokie, moving on. Next book. This next book was, a winner. So the next prompt was to read a new to me author. I chose to read The Pharaoh's Daughter by Masu Andrews. You guys, this book, I would say, is, if not best book of the year so far, it is up there. So previously it was Burning Girls by CJ Tudor. This might have just knocked that off the pedestal for best book of the year. This book was so good. I've never read anything by this author, obviously, like I said, since it's new to me author. I could not put this book down. So I listened to this on an audiobook. The audiobook was good. The only thing I would say about the audiobook was a little bit of a critique, and it's not necessarily bad. It also doesn't help. I was listening to it in the car when I was driving to and from Boise to see my boyfriend, so it was a little difficult to understand because for whatever reason, audiobooks like don't play loud in my car stereo. It's weird. There were a couple names that were very similar, and so it was sometimes a little bit difficult to know who they were talking about. It's possible, I mean, if I read it physically, obviously I would know because you could read the difference between the names. And I think maybe if I wasn't driving, I didn't have road noise, it might have been a little bit easier for me to hear it. But that's like my only critique that's of the audiobook. It's not the book itself, because again, I think if you were actually physically reading it, you'd be able to differentiate between the names. So what is this book about, you say? Well, this book is about Pharaoh's daughter. Okay, so I did a kind of road trip vlog talking about this book. I will post it. I don't know if it'll be posted before or after this, so just look for it. If it's posted before this, there'll be a link. If not, keep an eye out for it. This is about the woman who rescued Moses from the Nile. So if you are unfamiliar with the Bible story of Moses, of who he is, basically in ancient Egypt, the Israelites were slaves, and there was a point where the Pharaoh, in this book, the Pharaoh is King Tut, which is really interesting. I'll get into that in a minute. The Pharaoh basically was like, the Israelites are becoming too populated. There's too many of them. I'm worried that they are going to overrun us. And so he basically made a decree that every newborn Hebrew male baby was to be thrown into the Nile. And this is a really horrific thing where the Egyptian soldiers would come in and take brand new newborn babies and throw them into the Nile to feed the crocodiles and drown. And horrible, really horrible thing that happened. Well, Moses, his mom and dad basically hid him until he was a little bit older and they couldn't hide him any longer. They basically put him in a basket and put him on the river and prayed that God would save him, and he was found by Pharaoh's daughter. In this story, that daughter is not the current Pharaoh. She is actually King Tut's sister, so she is Akhenaten's daughter, which is King Tut's father. I go into that more in my story. But anyways, that's the basic of Moses, and then he went on to be raised as the Prince of Egypt, and then he eventually freed or helped lead the slaves to freedom into the wilderness. That's the story of Moses. Anyways, this book though was specifically about the woman who found him and who raised him as her own son. Oh my gosh, it was so good. Like, I'm getting chills just thinking about it. It was so beautiful. I laughed, I cried, I was angry. I was like, I so hope that this woman was as amazing in real life as she was in this story. Like, I'm getting like emotional about it, you guys, because it was such a good book. It really, really touched on God's faithfulness. That was another thing with the last book too. It really touched on trusting the Lord and trusting in God's faithfulness when really you think that your life is just completely, you know, awful. Like the first woman obviously was a widow, and her husband, you know, and then her friend dies and all this stuff, or is murdered, and she's like, how can I trust God in this? And then this book was very much about trusting God's providence in not only whether or not he would flee the slaves, but then, you know, just taking care of Moses. And you have a couple different perspectives. You have the perspectives of the daughter, the queen, or not the queen, I'm sorry, Pharaoh's sister. And then you start when she's like very, very young, and you pretty much follow her journey and you follow her arc. It's multiple, spans multiple years. That's what I'm looking for. Many, many years into the future, when Moses is now like a young man, like 18, 19 years old, is kind of where the book ends. This is the first in a trilogy, and I cannot wait to get the other two books because I just is obsessed. So basically you follow her story. It's her story mainly, but then you also follow the story of a linen keeper. He is one of the Israelite slaves, but he is very close to this woman's husband, and he is the head linen maker of the estate. They are known for their linen, and it kind of follows his story too, and it's so beautiful, just the way they intertwine, and learning about things that like I thought were just a part of the story that the author just put in for just, you know, to make the story interesting, but realize that they were actually biblical. And I was like, shoot, I need to go read my Bible more, because I did not know that was real. I thought that was just to make the story move forward, but no, that it really happened. And so I was like, oh my gosh, that's really cool. Yeah, I have a feeling I'm not telling you much about this book, but it basically just follows her story, her journey, how she found Moses, how she raised him as her own son, why she chose to raise him as her own son. It deals with family trauma, with family issues. It deals with death, with grief, with marriage, with miscarriage, with infertility. I mean, there are some heavy topics in this book, but I think that the author handled it so beautifully. I really recommend this book to anyone who is interested in ancient Egypt, interested in like biblical history, biblical fiction. Even again, if you're not just interested in ancient Egypt at all, I really believe this is a really good book that you would probably enjoy. It wasn't crazy atmosphere. I mean, it was atmospheric. It like definitely took me in and made me feel like I was there, but it wasn't like overly flowery writing, like it wasn't purple prose or anything. It was just one of those books that really sucks you in and made me be like, wow, I feel like I'm part of the story. I feel like these characters are real characters, like it's telling a true life story. I mean, obviously these people did exist in real life. This is a fictionalized version of them, obviously, but it really felt like they could be real. Like this could be who they really were. I mean, this author did a really amazing job at that. So I am so grateful that I picked this book up. Like I said, I think it's definitely a contender for favorite of the year. And I cannot wait to read the rest of the series, and I cannot wait to read more from this author. But I didn't say 5 stars, obviously. I think you would know that. But yeah, definitely a very high 5-star book. Sorry about the angle change. My phone was dying. I had to plug it in, and I don't have a charger. Sorry, the camera was on that side. Now it's on this side, so it'll take me a minute to adjust. Yeah, I don't have or my charger wouldn't reach to where I was sitting. So anyways, sorry about the angle change. I know it's a bit weird. Let me see if I can fix this. Okay, hopefully that's a little bit better. Hopefully that's a little bit straighter. The next prompt was to read a mystery thriller. And the book I chose is I Saw by Jerry B. Jenkins. I realized that in my TBR, I forgot to say this is also with James S. McDonald. McDonald. I forgot to say that, so I apologize about that. But this book I saw, this is a dual timeline story about a man who named Atticus. He is a young seminary professor, and he gets a call from a really good friend of his basically saying like, hey, I need you here in Rome, like ASAP, very secretive, very hush-hush, like my life is literally in danger, come help me. And so he's like, what the heck? So he basically has to drop everything and go there. And there is an ancient artifact that was found that basically a bunch of people want, and literally people are willing to kill for it. And so he has to try and work with his friend and try to help him get this artifact to the authorities in the right place without getting killed in the meantime. And on the opposite, or the dual timeline, takes place in ancient Rome. I don't know what the AD 67. So AD 67, and you had the apostle Paul or Saul. So there was a man named Saul who changed his name to Paul when he became a follower of Jesus. And he is in prison awaiting his execution. And this is real. This happened in real life. Again, I know people don't necessarily believe the Bible is a real story or real, but this is documented. This was a real man who really lived, was really executed by Rome in 67 AD. And basically it is Saul is telling his story to Luke, who is one of the authors of the Bible. So Paul, the apostle Paul, who again is Saul, same person, different names, wrote a lot of the New Testament. And he is here telling basically his story to Luke, who wrote the book of Luke in the New Testament. And I really, really enjoyed this. I give this a 4-star. It was really fun. I really like dual timelines. I'm finding that like I really enjoy that in a book, the back and forth. The authors did a really good job at keeping it relevant, keeping it feeling like I wasn't getting confused. I wasn't being like, oh wait, where are we now? And the story was very linear, I think, even though again, it's back and forth. And you really are kind of in different timelines, because in the present timeline, you're having flashbacks. And in the ancient timeline, you're also having flashbacks. But like I said, I think the authors did a very, very good job at keeping everything cohesive. It was very easy to understand. I didn't get lost in the story. I was able to understand and follow. Really interesting. Again, this was another book that talks about God's faithfulness, trusting the Lord, you know, knowing that he is going to be faithful no matter what happens. And even though it might not turn out the way that you perceive that it should, God is still faithful. And this is like, I remember I like read these books and I was like, okay, Lord, obviously you're telling me that I just need to trust you, that you are faithful, because I've been dealing with a lot of stuff in my personal life that has made it really hard to trust and really hard to remember that God is faithful and that he's taking care of me, even though he is. Sometimes I forget that, especially when life gets really crappy and certain circumstances in my life and in some of my loved ones' lives has been really crappy. So obviously I was like, okay, God, I hear you. Like, yes, I know what you're telling me. But anyways, this was for a mystery thriller. Again, I read this. I really enjoyed it. I recommend it if you are a fan of biblical fiction, if you are a fan of learning about antiquities. It did talk a lot about antiquity, the trades over in Italy and Rome. It also talked about, again, Saul or Paul, his story. So if you're interested in that at all, obviously a fictionalized version. I don't know how much of that, his story, is known outside the Bible. Like if there's any more documents about who he is, the life that he lived as a young man. I don't know if they were taking off that or if they were just taking off general Israelite history or Hebrew history and going off that. Do not know. Anyways, I enjoyed it. It felt like a history lesson, but like in a good way, you know, like in a really good way. I love anything that has to do with ancient Egypt, which is a previous book, ancient Rome, this book. Love it. I'm obsessed with that time period. Absolutely love it. So this one, I also read this for the next prompt, which that has been on my TBR the longest. My brother bought this for me for my birthday, the year it came out, which was in 2013. So while this has not been on my TBR the longest out of any of my books, it has been on my TBR for a while. I've been meaning to read it for a while, and I read it and I really enjoyed it. Like I said, wasn't a 5-star, but still it was just a solid, really enjoyable book. One that I wouldn't mind reading again. Maybe I can pick up on some things that I didn't before. And it's not like super hardcore mystery. I say it's more mystery than thriller. It's definitely not necessarily thriller. There are some thrilling aspects, like, you know, they're running from people who are trying to kill them, but it's definitely more of a mystery. And I did think that they did the mystery aspect of this book. They did really well. So there's that. That was the book, like I said, for the last 2 prompts. And then the very last prompt that was there in the, wow, the very last prompt for this TBR was to read a romance or read a book with romantic elements. So I read The House on Foster Hill by Jamie Jo Wright. This is another dual timeline book. This is obviously another Christian fiction book. This one is also a bit of a mystery, like a murder mystery. I did really enjoy this book. I believe I gave this a 4.5 stars or 5. Let me check really quick. 4.5. So I gave this a 4.5. This book is, so Jamie Jo Wright, I've actually been really enjoying her books. I think this is the 3rd one I've read of hers. She seems to do dual timelines, like she really likes dual timelines, and I really like dual timelines too, so I'm happy to read this. Again, this is another book that, while it has faith elements, like the characters do believe in the Lord, it's not a preachy book. It's not slapping you over the face with religion. Again, another book that was trusting in God's faithfulness. Like, okay, Lord, I hear ya. So this is a book about, so it's dual timeline, like I said. It's about a woman whose husband was killed, she believes murdered, but the police say it was an accident, and she decides to move to her great-grandmother's hometown, I believe. She's from California, and she moves back east somewhere to this tiny little town, and buys this house that is like a major renovation house, and while she's there, she finds out that there was a murder that had taken place at that house before that somehow involves her great-grandmother. And so you have the dual timelines going between now, where this woman is trying to basically convince the police that her husband was murdered. She's dealing with a stalker, so you do have that aspect in here, and she believes that the man who killed her husband is stalking her and followed her to her new place. She is a social worker. She works with victims of domestic abuse. So you do have that. That is a trigger warning in this book. You do definitely deal with domestic violence, domestic abuse, sexual violence. It's not graphic, it's not explicit, but they do touch on the topics of that. So just be warned that if that is something that's triggering for you, just be, you know, aware going into this book. Again, it's not graphic or anything, but it does touch on the emotions and the topics. And so yeah, just make sure if that is something that is triggering to you, that you look up trigger warnings before you read this book. But I thought this book was done very well. I think the author handled the topic very well. Like I said, they go back and forth. In the past, you're trying to figure out, there's this body that is found near the house on Foster Hill, and this woman is basically trying to find out what happened. Who is she? Because no one knows who she is. Where did she come from? You know, what happened to her? And then in the future, you have kind of the same thing where this woman is investigating the past, what happened, because like I said, it does have to do with her great grandma, but also dealing with the fact that she has a stalker and she's trying to convince the police that someone is stalking her, her husband was murdered, all this stuff. So you have kind of these 2 different women who are both dealing with like a murder mystery, but then in the future you also, or in the present, you also have her trying to figure out what happened in the past, and in the past they're trying to figure out what's happening at that present. It's really interesting. I really enjoyed it. It takes place, I think the past is like the early 1900s, late 1800s. I'm trying to think. I think there are cars, so I think it would be, you know, around that time period. I can't remember if there's cars or if it's still like horse and wagon kind of thing. I can't remember, but it's kind of that time period. And yeah, I don't know if I'm doing a good job explaining this book, but I really liked it. It was, again, atmospheric. A lot of Jamie Jo Wright's books are very much, at least the ones I have read, are very much like, is it a person or is it paranormal? Like, you don't know. Is it a spiritual thing happening? Is it a real person? Is it a ghost? What is it? And I really like that kind of creepy aspect. So this is, in a way, like a haunted house story, like a murder mystery, haunted house, mysteries in the past and the present combining to tell the story. Very interesting, very good. Again, I think she handled the topic of domestic abuse, domestic violence very well. I personally have, thanks the Lord, have never been in that situation, but I do have some close family and friends who have experienced domestic violence, and so I can see it from that perspective, and I can say that I do think that the author, like I said, handled it very, very well. And I appreciate the way she took it, kind of the things that she talked about, the topics that she talked about, and the kind of things that she touched upon, especially in the past, of how a lot of times we don't realize in the past that these things were happening. Yeah, I thought it was really good. So if you like murder mystery, if you like kind of historical fiction, I guess it can be considered in a way, I would check this one out. Really enjoyed it. 4.5 stars. All right, that's it. That is my wrap up of my Christian fiction readathon. Yeah, I was gonna say TBR, but I was like, no, I mean, I guess it is a wrap up of the TBR, but those are the books that I read in the month of May for this readathon. If you guys like this video, please give it a thumbs up. I would really appreciate it. I will link, like I said, information down below, all of that. I don't remember what the group read was. I think it was some kind of like romantic read, which is probably why I didn't read it, because like, again, I'm not a romance reader. But I will list, you know, the creator, her information down below, announcement video. I mean, even though it's past, but whatever. Anything you want to know, just check it out down below. You can find me on social media, Goodreads, Twitter. I hardly ever use Twitter, but I'm there. Instagram, all linked down below. And yeah, subscribe if you want to see more videos by me. And thanks for watching, guys. So I will hopefully see you in my next video. Bye.